they act like veins. They're going to be taking, they move one direction, they're taking the fluid, they're actually going to take it, like I said, back towards the heart, because you can see here, you've got these lymphatic ducts that are entering in with the veins. That's where the lymphatic fluid will drain once it's gone through the lymph nodes. And so the lymph nodes themselves, you can see, here's a lymph node over here. Okay, and the lymph node themselves, they have plenty of lymphocytes and macrophages in them. And the lymph fluid will come out, it will go in, and it will get filtered through those lymphocytes and macrophages, reticular tissue in there that acts almost like a screen, kind of catching things. Okay, and then it will go back out of those through those lymphatic vessels, and now it's going to head back towards the heart so it can be incorporated back into the circulatory system. Okay, so the adaptive response, or that specific response, has to have 4 characteristics happening for it to be able to work properly. Okay, it has to be able to do self, non-self recognition. Remember, that wasn't important for the innate system. Remember, because the innate system is just a generalized response. But these need to be able to determine whether they're attacking a self or a non-self cell. If they're attacking self cells, you get autoimmune disorders. Things like juvenile diabetes would be a result of this. Okay, so the adaptive immune response has to be able to recognize self versus non-self. Okay, it is specific. It has to have specificity. Okay, it has to be specific to the particular pathogen. Again, you don't want it attacking your own cells. It has a significant amount of diversity to it. There is a wide variety of pathogens. A wide variety of pathogens means you need a wide variety of cells that can respond to those pathogens. And then it helps that it has those memory cells. Okay, so that the second time you're exposed to a pathogen, your immune system can respond extremely quickly. And so then you don't necessarily contract, get the full-blown disease or the full-blown disorder. Okay, so let's look at how it's able to recognize self versus non-self. Okay, so these cells are going to be able to recognize self versus non-self using what's called the major, let's see if I can fit it in this space, histocompatibility. This is not going to happen. Oh, I did it. The major histocompatibility complex, which from now on will be the MHC. Okay, but if you're doing like a free response on your AP test, at some point you will need to let them know that MHC is major histocompatibility complex. Okay, so the major histocompatibility complex, okay, break that down just a little bit. Okay, histo is tissue. Okay, so I'm looking for a big, huge, major thing, important thing here that can be compatible with the tissues. Okay, it's a network of proteins that's compatible with my tissues. Okay, and so what these major histocompatibility complexes are is they are cell surface proteins that are unique to each person. Okay, so they're cell surface proteins unique to everyone, with the exception of identical twins. Okay, identical twins, their MHC complexes are the same. Okay, so your major histocompatibility complexes, there are 3 different classes of them. You can see here I've got an MHC class 1, MHC class 2, and then there's also an MHC class 3. Okay, so I've got 3 classes of these major histocompatibility complexes. MHC1, okay, so MHC class 1 is going to be on all kinds of cells. Okay, so all cells have it. So if you look here, I've got this pink here. Okay, this major histocompatibility complex. Got it, got it, got it, recognizing it. Okay, so my major histocompatibility class 1 is used for, these are mainly used for that self, non-self recognition, because all of your body cells have these. Every single kind of cell in your body has an MHC1 on it. Okay, so that your body can recognize that that belongs to you, okay, and they shouldn't attack it. MHC2 complexes, okay, those are found on what are called antigen-presenting cells. So these are mostly phagocytic cells, okay, cells that are going to basically once they realize there's an antigen, they're going to go get it, grab it, and take it around and start showing it to people, showing it to other cells. Hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. This doesn't belong. Hey, this doesn't belong. Fix it. Hey, this doesn't belong. Take care of this. Okay, so MHC class 2, these are on antigen-presenting cells, B cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, and so these allow those kinds of cells to talk to one another. So MHC class 1 is for your body's self, non-self recognition. MHC class 2 is for communication between immune cells. These B cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, they present the antigen to other immune cells using the MHC class 2. So it allows those two kinds of immune cells to talk to one another. MHC class 3 is a big part of the innate immune system. Okay, so I'm blaming it on the fact that I have a cold. Okay, so MHC class 3 is for the innate immune system. It's important for inflammation. Okay, it can help trigger complement proteins. Okay, so we're not going to talk about MHC class 3 very often in this. We're obviously going to be talking a lot more about MHC1 and MHC2. Okay, so your MHC complexes, your major histocompatibility complexes, are going to be made up of 4 polypeptide chains. Okay, and they're going to have this little cleft here. Whoops. They're going to have this little cleft here, okay, that is going to allow for the antigen to bind. And that's a relatively general binding site. Okay, so your MHC complexes, they have a generalized binding site there for your antigen. They are not super specific like lots of other things that we've talked about. So they have this general binding site for the antigen, okay, that's made of these groups of polypeptide chains. Okay, and what they do is they're going to help bring the foreign material up to the surface of a cell. So if you have a cell that's been infected, it's got lots of pathogens in it, they're going to take those antigen pieces, okay, so those pieces of those foreign invaders, and they're going to push them up through the cell membrane to show them to the other cells so that they can help take care of it. Like for instance, you have an infected cell over here on this side. Okay, so this is your body cell. It's infected with the antigen, okay, and that MHC class 1 is presenting the pieces of the antigen. So this MHC class 1, think of it starting off down here. It picked up one of these guys. Okay, it picked up some of these antigens here, and it's going to shove them up through the membrane so now other cells can see them. Okay, same with the antigen-presenting cells. Okay, so remember your antigen-presenting cells, they have both kinds. They have class 1 because all the cells in your body have class 1, and they have class 2 because they need class 2 so they can talk to the other immune cells. So they're doing the same thing though. They've taken portions of these antigens, okay, and they've pushed them up through the cell membrane to show them off to the other cells so that hopefully the other cells can see them and will say, hey, this doesn't belong, let's take care of this. So even though they are these antigen-presenting cells, they're usually phagocytes, so they're destroying the antigen as they are showing it off, but in this way they can help recruit more. Okay, so they're destroying the antigen as well as showing it off so that they can speed up the destruction process. Okay, so let's look at how T cells are going to be able to recognize self from non-self. Okay, so we're focused here on T cells. Okay, and so we're talking about what these cells, how these cells are going to be able to recognize self from non-self, because we don't want T cells attacking our own healthy cells. Okay, so the first thing the T cell is, one of the options that the T cell may do, okay, is that the T cell may bind to the body's proteins and the MHC. Okay, so if the T cell binds to the body's proteins and major histocompatibility complex, okay, so that's what's happening here. It binds tightly to body proteins and the MHC, then the result is going to be apoptosis. Okay, and if you remember, apoptosis is programmed cell death, because if this T cell binds to your body's cell in MHC, okay, that means it recognizes it, and that's bad. We don't want it to attack itself. So that's going to induce apoptosis. That T cell does not know how to recognize self versus non-self. Okay? if the second option then would be that it binds weakly, so it can weakly bind to the MHC, but not the proteins. Okay, and you guys, hopefully you remember, but we talked about it a little bit. I talked about it earlier. Okay, that the T cells, they had to bind to both. They had to bind to the MHC and the protein. If they don't bind to the MHC and the protein, they won't be activated. So they could bind weakly to the MHC, but not the protein. That cell is okay. So the result here is the cell gets to live. That cell's okay. It's going to survive. Okay, the third option here is it doesn't bind to the MHC at all. Okay, well, if it doesn't bind to the MHC at all, then how is it going to bind later when it's presenting an antigen to it? Okay, it's not going to bind to that MHC later either. So this results also in apoptosis. Okay, that cell also is not making it. So that's how these cells. Okay, that's how these T cells can start to learn to recognize self versus non-self. Okay, so our survivors, the ones that make it through here, okay, that are able to weakly bind to the major histocompatibility complex, but not the proteins. Okay, these are cells that are able to recognize the major histocompatibility complex, and so then if something foreign is in there, okay, then they can go after it. But if there is nothing foreign there, then they won't go after it. They're not attacking your own cells. Okay, so that's the goal there. That's why those cells get to survive. Okay, so we've got those T cells activated. So now let's see how we're or recognizing self and non-self. So now let's see how the B cells are going to be taught to recognize self. Okay, so B cells, if you remember, they mature in the red bone marrow. They don't go to the thymus like the T cell does. Okay, they stay right there in the marrow. So if the B cell receptor, so there's our first option. Okay, the B cell receptor can match one of the surface proteins on the bone marrow cells. That's a C. So if that B cell receptor matches a surface protein in the bone marrow, okay, so in the bone marrow cells, that's what I've got happening here, okay, that means that B cell is able to bind to your own cell, which is bad. We don't want that, right? So our result here is going to be apoptosis. Okay, we want the B cell binding to foreign things, not to yourself. Okay, we don't want the B cell to think when that it's binding to you, and so it needs to make antibodies for you. Because remember, the receptor for the B cell is the same structure as the antibody structure. So that means this B cell would make antibodies that match these receptors, and so it would attack your bone marrow cells. So that wouldn't be any good. Okay, B cells that remain naive. So the second option, okay, is the B cell doesn't bind. Okay, so it does not bind to the surface protein, so it remains a naive cell. It doesn't become an activated cell. Okay, it doesn't become activated, and so it's not, it's ignoring your own surface proteins. And so then it should recognize foreign material. Your B cells only have two options. They recognize one of your cells in the bone marrow, so we cut them off. Apoptosis. That cell's not surviving. They don't recognize something in your bone marrow. All right, great. Now they should hopefully recognize things that are foreign to you. Okay, and so those naive B cells then migrate to the secondary lymphatic tissue to wait to be activated. Okay, so in the beginning we mentioned that there were two types of responses for the adaptive immune system. Okay, it could be a cell-mediated or a humoral response. So let's focus first on the cell-mediated one. So the cell-mediated one, okay, the first thing we're going to happen here is we've got to have these antigen-presenting cells need to get activated. Okay, so I've got my macrophages, my dendritic cells. Okay, they're going to come in contact with our pathogens. So these are our pathogens here. Okay, and here's my macrophage. And so my macrophage comes in contact with my pathogen. It encounters my pathogen. And so as it arrives at the infection site, it begins phagocytosis. Okay, so it's going to engulf